right, welcome back. Thanks everyone for joining. Welcome back to How to Hack Your Own SAT Program. We're going to continue to dive further into curriculum, probably the most important part of this video series. So, well, that's not to de-emphasize all our other wonderful videos, but these are important. So, let's get right to it. So Jason, today we're going to talk about math. Okay. Specifically, what I'm hoping that viewers are able to obtain by the end of this video is just a stronger sense of what needs to absolutely be covered in the math when they're building their curriculum related to math. So maybe the first place to start is for the test makers. What are they assuming students know, or what kind of knowledge should they already be equipped with coming into the exam related to math? I know that's a big question.
No,
but I think it's an important one.
I agree with you. It's completely important. Understanding what the test writers and test makers, the College Board, think is important is very important for knowing what you want to focus mathematically. So the College Board describes the math on the SAT in three major categories with somewhat silly names. They talk about the heart of algebra, whatever that means, problem solving and data analysis, and, I kid you not, the passport to advanced math.
If anyone from the College Board is watching, just don't mind us.
I mean, they gotta know. They gotta know it's silly. But so you notice here that one of the three major topical areas they talk about is the heart of algebra. So they really believe algebra is incredibly important. Between the heart of algebra, questions in the problem solving area, and the advanced math area, algebra accounts for well over 50% of the topics covered in the math sections. Yeah. And another large 30-40% is statistics, problem solving, word problems, data analysis, charts, tables, graphs. Yeah. That's what they feel is really important. Interestingly, they have seriously de-emphasized geometry in the last 2 years. Up until 2016, geometry was about 25 to 30% of the questions, and now it's about 5%.
It's interesting, and not to interrupt you here, but so we ran these comparison tests, right? So for some schools, and every time we looked at like the meta-analysis for the entire class taking it, the thing that they always struggled with was geometry for some reason, right? And so it's interesting to hear that they're now de-emphasizing it. Is that also in response to the fact that, do they think schools are de-emphasizing it? And maybe the scores are now kind of showing this reflection of no one cares about geometry anymore, right? Like, I mean, what?
The problem is I don't feel comfortable psychoanalyzing the College Board.
Okay.
And if you look at the major competitor to the College Board, the ACT, they have not.
Yeah.
1/3 of the questions, pretty straightforward, 1/3 of the questions on the ACT still involve some level of geometry.
Wow.
So I just don't know why they feel that way. I mean, generally they seem to be pretty tuned in. I mean, they added the essay to the SAT back in 2005 in direct response to what they were seeing in education, a re-evaluation of the role of writing in the public schools, colleges' re-emphasis on writing. So they were right on top of that. So they might be seeing something that we're not, because they're directly tied into and communicating with major school systems, university systems, the Ivy Leagues, etc.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
So let's say someone's like they're a junior, they're practicing, or they're getting ready for the test. I guess if they're in Algebra 2 at that point, they should be mostly in good shape for the test? Or?
I agree completely.
Okay.
Basically, the topics covered on the SAT, and this surprises a lot of people, but a large minority of the questions on the math part of the SAT involve middle school math topics. So...
Middle school math topics?
Yes. Middle school level statistics, understanding mean, median, and mode, how to do proportions, how to understand ratios, basic pre-algebra skills.
It's so funny that, we do this test prep all the time, right? And you hear, those terms, right? And to us, it's like, oh yeah, that's what we always teach juniors. But you forget, you do learn that in middle school.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of skills that are covered from middle school math up through Algebra 1 into Algebra 2. And then there's maybe one or two things that are often touched on in pre-calculus now on the SAT since 2016.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So now if you're thinking about just So we covered the basic subjects, but what are the areas, and I talked a little bit about geometry, but from your perspective, what are the areas that students generally struggle with the most when it comes to the math lessons?
It has to do, and I think I've mentioned this in previous videos, it has to do with the prioritization for public schools in different states.
Okay.
But I've taught SAT and test prep in various different places, California, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and it's pretty universal.
Yeah.
And these are school systems of varying different strengths.
Yeah.
But one area that almost every student struggles with is exponents.
Okay.
Most students do not feel comfortable with not only the advanced topics in exponents,
Yeah.
but also some of the basics.
Yeah.
Another area is setting up and solving systems of equations. I've talked about that a lot. I bring it up a lot because it is an area where students really struggle. And the third one is how to break down. And this goes into more problem solving and what we teach in terms of strategies than math skills.
Yeah.
But it is something that students start working with in math from 3rd and 4th grade on, which is word problems.
Yeah.
Word problems can be overwhelming to students, and the SAT writes word problems that are particularly obtuse, long, boring, confusing.
Yeah. And as you're mentioning all these different topics and subjects, does it make sense for a school to just look at kind of how the students are performing in math overall and try to kind of like look at the weak areas and try to line it up to test prep, or just, I guess what I'm trying to say is when you're building your curriculum plan or they're building their syllabus, is it better to just go with kind of like, okay, here's the consistent approach we're going to take in the syllabus versus here's how our students have performed in math and we should cover these areas first? You know what I mean? Like, is it...
Right. I think that when you're setting up an SAT curriculum for your school, definitely looking at where your students are missing out in certain very particular topics can be helpful once you've taught the strategies first.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, the first couple that you want to teach, because again, SAT is so specific. Mm-hmm. Really, when you're taking the SAT, really, like some people joke that when you take the SAT, what you're demonstrating is your ability to take the SAT.
Yeah, that's
a common joke that we hear.
Yeah.
Late night talk show hosts can make that joke. It's so common.
Yeah.
But it is true that because the test is really a problem-solving test first and a content-based test second. And I know I've said that many times, but it bears repeating because so many people are shocked when they hear that and have a hard time getting to that place where they believe that.
Yeah.
But it is true. So focusing on strategies first, and then as the students are mastering the strategies and you're starting to see that it's math topics, because we're talking about math, but grammar topics or certain vocabulary topics, if you're talking about the English section, that are jumping out as being areas where even though now that they're improving on the strategies, they're still making mistakes, then you want to brush up on that content.
Yeah.
And those types of areas, like I talked about, exponents, systems of equations, etc., they tend to be areas that jump out a lot. So having extra practice in the second half of your program is a good way to address that.
Has there been any changes? Since, think about for most of the people that are probably building their own programs, right? They took the SATs in the 70s, 80s, 90s, those types of things, right? Mm-hmm. Has the math program, I know that the tests are always being updated, but, you mentioned like exponents and systems of equations. Is that consistent with has it always been like those are the areas, or more recently has the curriculum changed to the point where like they're now focusing in on those areas that are now problem areas?
So I'm going to date myself.
Okay.
I took the SATs in the late 80s.
Okay.
And when I took the SATs, there were no systems of equations questions on the SAT.
Okay.
It didn't reach that far.
Yeah.
The level of math, there were exponent problems, but they were the basic rules, not the advanced rules.
Yeah.
And if you're listening at home and you're an administrator and you're not a math teacher, the basic rules are the basic exponent rules when you're multiplying or dividing exponents, and the advanced ones are fractional and negative exponents.
Yeah.
And if you're a math teacher, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But the advanced math exponent rules were not on the test. Nowadays, you have up through the unit circle and more advanced trigonometric equations.
Yep.
That's since 2016.
Yep.
So when, if you have a student, let's say you're not only an administrator or a teacher or a guidance counselor, but you're also a parent, if you have a student who's going through the SAT now and they have an older sibling who's in college, they're taking a different test.
Yep.
So every 10 to 12 years, the SAT updates the test, and the biggest thing that usually changes about the math is they will take out some topics, recently geometry, and they'll add more advanced algebra.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So I'm not going to sit here and ask you to kind of list out an example math syllabus. That's included in the article, the math curriculum article that went out. So there's an example syllabus that's in there, and it's got all the details or some details in terms of what you could offer for a math lesson or math lessons in an SAT program. But more specifically, let's just give an example strategy,
Sure.
right? So, I think we always talk about, as we talked about before, the drill and kill practice questions versus the strategies approach. What's an example strategy that you think really helps students with
Sure.
the math section?
So once again, I've got my favorite prop, the official SAT study guide. And again, for those listening at home on the audio podcast, I am holding it up. And I'm using the College Board's official materials. It's their materials, it's their question, they wrote it. So I'm in the most recent edition, I'm on page 203. It's chapter 16, The Heart of Algebra. It is example 7. So if you have a copy of this available, you can even pause the video for a second, pause the podcast, and go grab it and bring it back. So the question is set up in a way as to trick you into doing the wrong way of solving. Let me read the question to you. Each morning, John jogs at 6 miles per hour and rides a bike at 12 miles per hour. His goal is to jog and ride his bike a total of at least 9 miles in no more than 1 hour. If John jogs J miles and rides his bike B miles, which of the following systems of inequalities represents John's goal? Now, if your head has not already exploded because you haven't seen an SAT question because you're an administrator or a teacher or a parent and you haven't seen one of these questions in 20 years, I know a lot of people are like in tears now, and I apologize for making you cry. I apologize. But
It's Friday, I'm just not there. But
No.
go ahead, please continue.
what they're telling you to do is set up a system of equations. No one wants to do that. No one wants, except maybe a math teacher, nobody wants to do that. And that is the trap. To try and bang your head against this question and come up with a system of equations, some equation with J and B and some number and an inequality. So the strategy that we would recommend to defeat this plan to make you do it the wrong way is called pick a number or plug in a number. So what I would recommend is to literally pick a value for J. John jogs J miles. No, John jogs 3 miles. J equals 3. And I'm going to write that down because it's a paper-based test. And rides his bike for B. So I'm going to say 15 miles. Which of the following is now going to be, instead of setting up an equation, it's going to be setting up math. Simple number crunching. So I can solve this mathematically, come up with a numerical answer, and then here's the trick to the way this strategy works. You take the values that you came up with, J and B, and then you plug them into each of the 4 answer choices, number crunch for a few moments, and see if the result of that answer choice matches the result you came up with when you solve the problem numerically. One of them will work, the other 3 will not. This problem has a bunch of fractions and inequalities, so you're not going to stumble across an answer that matches when it shouldn't if you've done the math correctly. And again, you want to pick numbers that are small, easy to use, something you could do by hand if it's not the calculator section.
Yep.
And that will defeat this puzzle using basic number crunching skills, especially if you've got the calculator, rather than having to rack your brain to try and write an equation, which no one wants to do.
Right.
So that's an example of how strategy beats the way they set up the puzzle.
Pick a number. I like it.
Yes.
I like it a lot. Okay. All right, great. Anything else related to math that you would maybe give in terms of a suggestion for folks teaching?
Now, I just described that strategy, and maybe some of you stopped and got a copy of the College Board book and tried to follow along and do it. And I do recommend trying it. It's a great strategy, and it's one that's
Well,
definitely
we'll put it
part of
up
the
on the
program.
screen too, right? So then people can
Yeah.
watch it.
But the thing is that practice is essential. So this strategy is not something I would expect students to master after me describing how to do it once. They've got to practice it.
Yeah.
You've got to review it. You've got to, when you assign the homework assignments from this book, I would recommend picking out the questions that use this strategy and being prepared for when students come in and say, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
And practice makes permanent. The more you practice something, the more permanently it gets lodged in your brain as a good thing. Remember, there are bad habits, but there are also good habits. So developing good habits in here is about practice.
Have you trademarked that yet?
I can't. There was a rugby coach in, I think, Arizona or New Mexico
Okay.
who came up with that.
Practice makes permanent.
Yeah, and he's apparently a very successful coach. I think his rugby team has only ever lost 3 matches in the last 20 years. I saw a movie about it. It was really good. I think it's on Netflix.
You never know what kind of information you're going to get on these videos.
Movie reviews can come later.
Exactly. All right, good. Well, thank you. Some great information related to math. We'll talk about verbal soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks.